Piers Morgan assumed he could catch Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett off guard with a smug remark. What he didn't expect was a composed, fact-based reply that silenced him and earned loud applause from the audience. Her chief of staff had assured her it would be a fair interview. Just a balanced exchange on civil rights, they said. He's looking for a strong voice, he'll keep it respectful. Still, when Jasmine Crockett arrived at the studio in Burbank that Thursday morning, something felt slightly off. Not dramatic, just a subtle shift, the kind of thing you sense only after spending time in similar spaces. The makeup artist glanced at her without a word. The production crew exchanged side looks. When she greeted the assistant producer, the room responded with an odd quiet. It felt like they were bracing for a moment. Piers Morgan was already seated when she entered. He didn't rise to greet her, just gave a nod and glanced at his notes. She took her seat, adjusted her mic, and offered a polite smile. "Morning." He looked up and returned a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good morning, Congresswoman Crockett. Let's have a spirited discussion, shall we? Live in 30 seconds. Jasmine straightened in her chair. She was used to being underestimated. Raised in Shreveport by a cafeteria worker and a truck driver, she'd practiced law in Dallas before entering politics. She had worked too hard to play small now. The stage lights flicked on. The producer pointed. "We're live in 3, 2. As the theme music faded, Piers began. "Welcome back to Piers Morgan Uncensored. Today we're joined by Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a rising figure in the Democratic Party and someone known for strong views on race, justice, and policing in America." She responded calmly, "Thank you for inviting me." He jumped in quickly. "Congresswoman, you've been very vocal about what you call systemic racism in this country. But many people would say that America elected a black president twice, and now has a black female vice president. Doesn't that show we've made great strides?" It was a familiar setup. Use signs of progress to challenge the existence of inequality. Jasmine didn't flinch. "Progress doesn't mean everything's fixed, Mr. Morgan. It just means we've come far enough to keep going." Piers pressed, a slight smirk on his face. "But you often use quite dramatic language. You once described some police actions as state-sponsored brutality. Isn't that a bit, let's say, emotionally charged?" The words lingered. She let the silence hang for a moment, like a teacher letting a student reflect on a weak question, then answered steadily. "When I see mothers burying sons before they turn 20, yes, I feel emotion. That doesn't make me irrational. It makes me human. But I'm not here with emotion. I'm here with evidence." Still, Piers wasn't interested in fairness. He was hunting for a soundbite. He leaned in. "And do those facts ever include personal responsibility?" Jasmine's eyes narrowed just slightly. "Absolutely. But let's not pretend accountability looks the same for everyone. We both know it doesn't." The control room grew still. The floor director shifted between the teleprompter and the crew. The interview was only minutes in, but already veering off the prepared track. Still, she remained composed, no raised voice, no dramatic gestures, just calm, focused responses that offered nothing to be taken out of context or spun into a sensational clip, and she was just getting started. Piers adjusted his tie and shuffled his papers, feigning spontaneity. But Jasmine could tell this next question had been planned. It wasn't off the cuff. It was deliberate, crafted to provoke. He glanced at the camera, then looked her in the eye. "Congresswoman, let's be honest. Isn't it draining to always portray America as the bad guy? There's a difference between thoughtful critique and, well, bitterness." The word landed heavily. Bitterness. It wasn't just aimed at her policies. It hinted at her temperament, her character, even her right to respond to injustice. A subtle jab disguised as a challenge. Jasmine didn't flinch. She simply leaned back, steady. "You think naming injustice is bitterness? Then maybe you've spent too long watching from the sidelines." That gave him pause. His jaw tightened, briefly. He hadn't expected that. "Let's be clear," she said, voice calm and even. "You can't celebrate Dr. King every January, then call people bitter in June for pointing to the same problems he died fighting." There was a quiet murmur from the crowd, not loud, but unmistakable. Piers pushed on, smiling tightly. "You're clearly passionate. I respect that. But don't you think viewing everything through a racial lens only pushes us further apart? Wouldn't moving forward mean leaving that behind? Jasmine shook her head lightly. That's like telling someone to stop mentioning the rain while they're standing in a downpour. He let out a dry chuckle. Fair point, but let's be real here. After a high-profile police shooting, you publicly criticized law enforcement. That officer was later cleared of wrongdoing. And yet you didn't retract your comments. Doesn't that show you jumped to conclusions? Her face remained composed, but inside, she felt a familiar frustration. Not fear, just disappointment. There it was, the framing he wanted. Portray her as someone who leads with outrage, then ignores the facts. It was the headline waiting to happen. Crockett disregards evidence. She waited just long enough to show she wasn't shaken. "Let me ask you something, Mr. Morgan," she said quietly. "Do you believe that a system that clears officers 99% of the time is automatically fair, or is it possible the system itself deserves closer examination?" He started to respond, but she continued. "Because if you're using clearance rates as proof of justice, then I'd suggest revisiting what happened in Mississippi last year. 2 unarmed teenagers shot during a routine stop. Body cam was off. Officers cleared in days. That's not justice. That's a failure. And those families are still waiting, still fighting for answers." Now she had the floor. Facts, context, real cases, not sound bites. Piers looked momentarily caught off guard. He turned a blank page on his notepad, buying time. Jasmine leaned forward slightly. "You want to talk facts? Fine, let's talk. Because I don't show up with slogans, I come prepared." The studio fell into silence. Even the makeup artist off stage paused, brush frozen midair, eyes fixed on the monitor. But Piers wasn't finished. "I just think it's risky," he said slowly, "to keep telling young Black Americans they're victims. Doesn't that hold them back more than the system ever could?" That's when Jasmine's smile faded. She calmly placed her hands on the desk and responded without any sign of frustration. "What's truly dangerous," she said, "is telling young Black Americans to stay quiet about their pain. Dangerous is pretending that being strong means staying silent. We've shown strength, we've shown resilience, and we've been ignored until we spoke up loudly." The audience shifted. A quiet yes came from someone in the back. Another person clapped once, then stopped, uncertain. "But," she added, tilting her head slightly, "we could tell them to move on, act like everything's fine, pretend the past didn't happen. That would be easier, wouldn't it?" Piers didn't respond. He blinked, silent. Jasmine could tell he was no longer leading the interview, he was responding to it. Still, she sensed what was coming next, and it would change the tone of the entire exchange. Piers leaned in, took a slow breath, and offered a tight smile. The kind that masks a pointed remark under the appearance of civility. "Congresswoman," he began with a deliberate patronizing tone. "You say you're bringing facts, but let's be honest. Your tone, your gestures, even your social media, it all comes across as emotional. You seem angry, not analytical, and people watching, they notice." There it was. Angry. Not assertive, not direct, not engaged. Angry. A familiar tactic used time and again when women, especially Black women, speak with confidence. Tag them as angry, then discredit what they say. Jasmine recognized it well. She didn't answer right away. She didn't have to. His words had already landed awkwardly in the room. One crew member winced. A camera operator shifted in place. She allowed the silence to linger, just long enough to let the impact settle. Then, in a calm voice, she asked, "Do you say that to Senator Burr when he shouts and bangs the desk on your show? Do you interrupt to talk about his body language?" Piers looked caught off guard. "Or is passion only a concern when it comes from someone like me?" She continued, still calm, still clear. "I come off as angry to you because I won't tone it down. I don't use your accent. I don't wait for permission to express myself. But trust me, what I'm saying today isn't emotion-based, it's based on experience, and that makes it more credible than whatever article you skimmed before this interview." A few people in the crowd laughed quick, knowing laughter. Not mocking, but affirming. Piers laughed too, though his eyes narrowed. "So now this is about my background?" No, Jasmine replied. You brought up mine. I'm simply pointing out that I don't need your approval to speak or to challenge you. You invited me here to have a conversation. Don't be surprised when I actually do. His smirk wavered. She continued. I've spent years in courtrooms, Piers. You know what doesn't hold up in court? Tone. Eyebrows. Social media. You know what does? Facts. So let's stick to those. He opened his mouth to respond, but she jumped in first. Since you mentioned social media, let's discuss yours. Last year you tweeted that kneeling during the national anthem was attention-seeking theater. That's your right. But I'm curious, what exactly were you seeking when you walked off your own show in 2021, after someone challenged your comments about Meghan Markle? The audience gasped, not out of theatrics, but genuine surprise. No one expected her to go there. But she did, and she wasn't finished. You can call it a meltdown or a moment of truth, Jasmine said. Either way, it wasn't logical, it was emotional. Yet here you are, still acting like you're the only adult in the room. Piers didn't move. His face stayed mostly blank, but his posture had changed. For the first time since the interview began, he looked slightly diminished. You asked if I was bitter, she went on, still composed. I'm not. But I am tired. Tired of proving I belong. Tired of explaining pain. Tired of being judged by standards that shift based on who's watching. Then she paused. The silence that followed was heavier than before. No one spoke, not even a breath. The audience didn't clap. They were still processing. Piers picked up his pen and tapped it against the desk, a nervous reflex. Well, he said stiffly, you've clearly prepared a few zingers. She didn't smile. No, I came prepared with the truth. And if that feels like a zinger, maybe that says more about you than me. But Jasmine knew the conversation couldn't stop with just silencing him in the moment. She had to make him reflect on himself and his record. Piers was now gripping his pen a little too tightly. The cameras didn't catch it, but Jasmine noticed. A subtle sign of someone who's used to directing the conversation, now feeling it slip away. He tried to reset. Congresswoman, I think we're getting off topic. This isn't about me. You're here to discuss your positions, not examine mine. Jasmine raised an eyebrow slightly. Not performative, just enough to register. She leaned in, her tone steady. Earlier you said I divide people, that I'm emotional, that I promote a victim narrative. You made it personal when you implied that my lived reality was a weakness. And now that I'm responding with facts you didn't expect, you want to walk it back. He blinked, hesitated. She didn't pause. You want to talk about division, let's revisit something, she said, now addressing the camera directly. Last year you referred to protesters in Minneapolis as a mob of violent agitators. But 6 months later, when truckers in Idaho blocked roads over vaccine mandates, you called them patriotic citizens making a stand. Same method, different race, different spin. A quiet came from the audience. Someone in the third row covered their mouth. Piers shifted slightly in his chair. Well, those were different situations. Were they? Jasmine asked calmly. Both groups were protesting what they believed was government overreach. One met with tear gas. The other received praise. One labeled a threat. The other heroes. So tell me, Mr. Morgan, what's the common thread in how you decided that? He opened his mouth, then stopped. He wasn't used to being challenged this directly, or this effectively. She kept going. You've built a career out of sparking outrage, but when someone reflects your own words back to you, suddenly it's about tone and decorum. How convenient. Piers's expression hardened slightly, just a flicker behind the eyes. Jasmine didn't let up. When George Floyd was killed, she said quietly, you tweeted that America needs to do better. And I agreed. But then weeks later, you criticized black athletes for kneeling during games, saying politics had no place in sports. There was a soft chuckle from behind the camera. She didn't break focus. You support the symbolism, but reject the protest. You want the grief, not the disruption. The poetry, not the pressure. You want black pain to be palatable. Not loud, not inconvenient. That line landed hard. Even the lights seemed to soften. Piers looked at her this time, not defensive or smug, something closer to uneasy. Jasmine didn't push for effect. She gave the moment space. "I don't need to be liked," she said, voice even. "That's never been my goal. But I will be heard, even if I have to speak the truth in rooms that were never meant for it." A small round of applause began. One person, then a few more. Not loud, not forced. Just people recognizing clarity. Piers tried to smile, but there was no weight behind it this time. "Well, you certainly came with your notes." Jasmine met his gaze without flinching. "No, I came with my experience. You call it notes because you didn't expect someone like me to be this prepared." In the control room, everything went still. No instructions, no cues, no chatter. The producer had his hand raised halfway, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let it roll. And before anyone could decide, Jasmine took it one step further, shifting from rebuttal to connection, speaking not just to Piers but to the people watching from home. Jasmine had already shifted the tone of the interview, but she wasn't finished. She understood that this platform reached far beyond the studio. This wasn't just about addressing Piers. It was about speaking directly to every viewer who'd ever been dismissed, interrupted or boxed in by someone with a platform and a patronizing smile. She turned slightly toward the camera. "Let's talk facts, since that seems to be the standard here. Real facts." Piers leaned back, exhaling through his nose, in an attempt to appear unfazed, but his knee tapped under the desk. "I've brought 3 examples," Jasmine said. "Not pulled from headlines or Twitter. These are drawn directly from court documents, depositions, and publicly available footage." Tension thickened again in the studio. Jasmine wasn't speaking off the cuff. This part had been carefully prepared, refined over months. This kind of clarity doesn't come from outrage. It comes from doing the work, reading, listening, and remembering stories that never made the front page. Case 1, Pasadena, California, 2021. Aaron Lowe, 27, pulled over on his way home for a broken taillight. Dashcam shows his hands were raised the whole time. He was shot twice. The officer said he thought Aaron was reaching. An internal review cleared the officer. But here's the part people miss. The body cam footage disappeared for 6 months. When it resurfaced, it had been edited. She let the point land. No rush, no drama. Just the facts. Case 2, Cleveland, Ohio. Last summer, Rhonda Belton called 911. Her ex was trying to break into her apartment. When officers arrived, they arrested her for disorderly conduct. Why? Because she was yelling. She spent 3 days in county jail, lost her job. Charges were dropped. No apology. No headlines. Piers blinked, then finally responded. "Congresswoman, I don't deny these are serious issues." She calmly cut in. "But you do deny them. When you ask if I'm being emotional, or call my tone angry, you're really saying that stories like Rhonda's or Aaron's only matter if they're presented politely." He went quiet again. Jasmine shifted direction. "Let me give you one more," she said, pulling a folded document from her jacket pocket. Not for show, but to back her point. Case 3. Your own words. March 2, 2022. Right here on this show you said, "I don't believe institutional racism exists in modern policing." That was just 3 days after the Department of Justice released a report showing disproportionate use of force against black drivers in 8 major U.S. cities, including Los Angeles. Piers cleared his throat. "Well, the context of that statement was..." She raised her hand slightly. "I know the context. I read the full transcript. You said the report wasn't conclusive, but that report included statistics, video evidence, and sworn testimony. What you meant was, it didn't fit your narrative." By now, the audience was fully engaged. Phones were out. A few heads nodded. People didn't need to agree with every point, but they could tell she wasn't bluffing. Jasmine turned back to him, her gaze steady. "I'm not here for applause. Not chasing headlines. I'm here because I represent people who bury their children while television hosts debate how upset we're allowed to look while mourning." A quiet stir passed through the crowd. A few leaned in closer. "Facts aren't weapons," she said, "but ignoring them, that's where the damage begins." Piers looked stuck. The energy he walked in with was gone. This wasn't an argument anymore. It had become a lesson. Jasmine softened slightly. "You can disagree with my tone, my politics, even my methods. But what you don't get to do is pretend I didn't come here prepared. You don't get to act surprised when I hold you to your own words." For a moment, the studio was still. No interruptions, no rebuttals, just that rare silence that follows a statement too precise to deflect. But what mattered wasn't the silence. It was what Jasmine said next that changed everything. The atmosphere shifted fast. Behind the cameras, one producer tapped his earpiece. "We should cut to break. Now." But the director didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the monitor. This wasn't falling apart. It was turning into a moment of broadcast history. In the control room, the usual background chatter had gone completely quiet. Even senior producers who had only dropped in for a routine check were now glued to the screen, watching every word that came from Jasmine Crockett's mouth. The cameraman on her left adjusted the focus, not because he needed to, but because his hand was trembling slightly. 16 years of experience behind the lens, and he'd seen it all. Meltdowns, deflections, performance. But this was different. Jasmine wasn't losing control, bluffing, or posturing. She was dismantling a legacy, live and in real time, without yelling, without insults, and without playing to the crowd. In the audience, a man in a gray hoodie leaned over and whispered, "She's handling him." Just loud enough for the row in front of him to chuckle. But Piers Morgan wasn't laughing. His eyes flicked toward his producer off stage, who was holding up a hand signal, either to stretch or to recover, depending on who you asked. Jasmine, unshaken, adjusted the mic clipped to her lapel. She wasn't putting on a show, she was composed and steady, not a single hair out of place, no sweat, no sign of nerves. Piers made an attempt to regain control. "Congresswoman," he began, now speaking more formally, "I think there's a distinction between isolated incidents and broader systemic issues, don't you agree?" She gave a slight smile. "Of course. Which is exactly why I came with federal data, body cam recordings and court statistics. If you think that's anecdotal, maybe your standard for evidence is just different." Even the technician behind camera 2 let out a quiet laugh. But Jasmine wasn't being smug. She wasn't trying to make him uncomfortable. She didn't have to. What resonated with people wasn't just her composure, but the clarity she maintained while delivering it. Then came the unexpected. A studio assistant, barely 23, fresh out of Fresno State, forgot the setting and clapped. Just 2 light claps, a soft pop-pop that echoed faintly. Piers heard it, and that's when his expression shifted. "Is this a talk show or a rally now?" he snapped, glancing off stage. Jasmine didn't flinch. "Neither. It's a moment of accountability. Something we could use more of, don't you think?" A few more claps followed, not coordinated, just honest, spontaneous reactions. People weren't responding to theatrics. They were responding because someone had finally voiced what they'd been shouting at their screens for years. Jasmine sat upright, voice level. "I'm not here to embarrass you, Mr. Morgan. That's never been the aim. But I will say this, when you've made a career of questioning others' credibility, you should be prepared to defend your own." Piers didn't reply right away. He looked down, not at his notes but at the empty space in front of him, as if searching for footing that had already slipped away. The director gave a sharp cue, "Cut to break." A producer's voice came through the floor manager's headset. "End it before it escalates." The screen began to fade. The segment was closing but the tension lingered, thick like the air after a summer storm. As the lights dimmed for commercial, Jasmine remained composed, focused. Piers adjusted his mic and stared off camera, his expression a blend of frustration and reflection. But no one was watching him anymore. The audience's focus had shifted entirely to Jasmine, not because she shouted or pushed for a confrontation, but because she reminded them that when truth is spoken clearly and unapologetically, it leaves a lasting impact. As striking as the studio moment had been, it was nothing compared to what unfolded once the cameras stopped and the internet took over. Though the broadcast had ended, the conversation hadn't. Backstage, the production team was already in motion. One producer was on the phone with public relations. Another had opened Twitter on her tablet, stunned by how quickly clips were circulating. Less than 3 minutes off the air, and Jasmine's closing remarks had already been recorded, captioned and posted by someone in the control room. Meanwhile, Piers remained in his seat. His team approached cautiously, but he waved them away. He hadn't expected to be challenged so thoroughly, and certainly not live, in front of a national audience. This wasn't a shouting match. There were no insults, no raised voices. He had been met with facts and composure, and had no reply. Jasmine sat in the green room for a brief moment alone, finally exhaling the kind of breath that follows holding steady under pressure. Her assistant, Trina, walked in, phone in hand, buzzing non-stop. "You're trending," she said. "Already top 5 in the US. Hashtag is Jasmine owned it." She showed her the screen. Jasmine let out a small laugh. "That's going to bother him." Trina smiled. "Oh, he's furious. Word is he's asking producers why they didn't cut sooner." But Jasmine wasn't celebrating. That wasn't her goal. It wasn't about winning a moment. It was about how many people had finally seen something they could relate to, something that made them feel acknowledged. "I just didn't want him twisting the story again," she said quietly. "Not while people are still paying the price out there." Trina nodded. "You didn't just hold your ground. You shifted the conversation." As they spoke, segments from the interview were already appearing across social media. One clip featured Jasmine's composed response to being called emotional. Another was trending with a side-by-side comparison of her confronting Piers about his conflicting takes on 2 protests. One black, one white. Commentators across the political spectrum responded. A conservative host called it a master class in staying composed. A progressive podcast described it as the clearest dismantling of media deflection in years. Even those who typically avoided politics were tuning in. At a bar in Tempe, Arizona, a group of college students watched the video on mute, reading subtitles on every screen. In a small Fresno apartment, a high school senior showed her mother and said, "She talks like you." That was the real shift. Not the applause, not the hashtags, but the feeling it left behind. The rare experience of someone speaking truthfully, calmly and authentically, without changing who they were just to be taken seriously. Back at the studio, one of the audio engineers approached Jasmine quietly. He looked around first, making sure no one was within earshot. "I just wanted to thank you," he said. She turned to him. "For what?" "For not making us feel like we're imagining things," he replied with a small smile. "We've listened to people talk in circles on this stage for years. Today felt different." Jasmine didn't quite know how to respond, so she simply nodded, appreciative. "Thanks for telling me." He walked away, and for a moment, she sat in silence. Trina returned with a grin. "They want you back next month." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Same show?" "Yup, same host." She tilted her head slightly. "I'll think about it." Outside, a crowd had formed. Word had spread quickly, too fast for security to manage. Some were reporters, but most were just regular people. Teachers, students, community organizers, mothers with young kids, all waiting to catch a glimpse. Jasmine stepped out. She didn't wave or stop for the cameras. She walked slowly, gave a quiet smile, and nodded in acknowledgement. It wasn't a performance. It never had been. She came for a conversation, and ended up offering a reminder. One that people were repeating in homes, group chats, classrooms, and city buses around the country. You can't silence the truth just because it's uncomfortable. But what happened next took a viral exchange and turned it into something bigger, an echo that reshaped how millions saw her, and maybe even themselves in just one night. By early evening, the clip had over 12 million views. No dramatic music, no edits, just a straight recording of Jasmine calmly speaking across from Piers Morgan. A moment that didn't need a headline or filter to resonate. News anchors analyzed it, radio hosts debated it, and online comment sections exploded. But something else was happening in less visible places. At a high school in Jackson, Mississippi, the debate club paused their meeting to watch the entire segment. Their teacher, Mr. Holloway, normally strict about phone use, projected the clip on the wall. "Watch her posture," he told them. "That's how you stay composed." In Fort Wayne, a grandmother sent the video to her church group with the note, "This woman speaks for us." Even those who didn't fully agree with Jasmine acknowledged one thing. She was composed and clear. She didn't just answer questions, she led the conversation. By 8 p.m., hashtags like Jasmine owned it, say it plain and calm as power had taken over social media. But Jasmine herself hadn't posted anything. No tweets, no reposts, nothing. She didn't need to. The message had already landed. Piers, meanwhile, stayed silent. No follow-up segment. No pointed blog post. His network issued a standard PR statement about respecting different views and encouraging healthy dialogue. But it didn't stick. Viewers had seen the moment for themselves, unedited, and no press release could spin that. Later that night, in her hotel room in Glendale, Jasmine sat cross-legged on the bed. Her laptop was shut. Her phone buzzed nonstop. She let it. She didn't want to get lost in the noise. It wasn't the goal. Trina was across the room, scrolling through messages. "Your aunt in Baton Rouge said she had to lower her hearing aid." Trina laughed. "Said she's never heard you this clearly before." Jasmine smiled. "She always says that." Trina looked up. "But she's right. You were clear. And steady. I think that's what hit people." "It's not about speaking louder," Jasmine replied, almost to herself. "It's about staying grounded." Then there was a soft knock at the door. Unexpected. Jasmine opened it to find a young black woman, maybe mid-20s, wearing a hotel blazer and name tag. She looked unsure. "Hi," she began. "I'm sorry if I'm not supposed to come up. I saw what you did today, and I wanted to thank you." Jasmine's expression softened. "You're not bothering me." The woman gave a small smile. "It's just, I'm usually the only black woman in meetings here, and I've been told I'm too much or difficult to work with more times than I can count. Watching you today, I didn't feel so alone." Jasmine stepped aside. "What's your name?" "Kaylee." "Kaylee," she said, "don't let anyone make you believe you have to shrink to make them comfortable. Understand?" Kaylee nodded, eyes misty. "Being direct isn't rude," Jasmine added. "Being ready isn't aggressive. And asking to be treated fairly isn't asking too much." Kaylee smiled. "I needed that. A lot of us did." They stood quietly for a moment. No flashes. No audience. Just two women sharing a moment that didn't need explanation. When Kaylee walked away, Jasmine lingered at the door before slowly closing it. That night, a college student in Baltimore tweeted, "Jasmine didn't argue. She didn't perform. She stood her ground and spoke like my mom would, with facts, with heart, and with grace. That's the new standard." The post reached 300,000 likes in under 4 hours. Because that's what it had become. Not a trend or a televised clash, but a reflection. A moment that asked, who do we listen to? Who gets dismissed? And what does strength really look like when it doesn't have to shout? But as powerful as that moment was, the real impact wasn't in the views or applause. It came from how Jasmine chose to use the attention the next day. That's what defined the true success. The next morning, Jasmine Crockett was already up before sunrise. She sat at a small desk by the hotel window, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching the sky fade from black to gray over the San Fernando Valley. Her inbox was a mess. 4 missed calls from her communications director, 2 interview requests from national morning shows, and dozens of texts from people she hadn't heard from in years. But she wasn't rushing. Her team thought she should seize the moment, go viral, release a statement, speak to every outlet. But Jasmine wasn't chasing headlines. Moments fade. She wanted to create something lasting. By 8 a.m., she was dressed in a simple black blazer, hair pulled back, logging into a Zoom call with her district team in Texas. "Morning," she greeted, offering a light wave. Her chief of staff, Russell, grinned. "You broke the internet and still showed up for housing committee updates like it's a regular Tuesday." "It is Tuesday," Jasmine replied, "and all those tweets don't make rent any cheaper." That's who Jasmine was, and always had been. Back in Burbank, the network's internal chats were buzzing. Producers and hosts were still processing how the segment had veered off script, how the audience stayed engaged the entire time, how even the quietest crew member asked for the raw footage to show his daughter. Piers Morgan's team was in full damage control. He declined follow-up interviews and skipped a scheduled appearance on another network later that day. Some former supporters began distancing themselves from the fallout. "It's not about winning or losing. one radio host said carefully. It was a challenging conversation. That's part of real journalism. But most people weren't buying it. Meanwhile, the clip kept spreading, not just in political circles but across all kinds of feeds. Teachers, pastors, comedians, Gen Z influencers, even sports commentators shared it. One NBA player reposted Jasmine's line, "Being prepared isn't being aggressive" on Instagram, adding simply, "that part." But Jasmine wasn't counting likes. She was working on a letter. Later that day, she walked into a small meeting room at a community center in South Dallas. No cameras, no reporters, just her, a few staffers, and about 20 local parents. The event had been planned 2 weeks earlier, well before the interview. Know Your Rights, a community legal session with Rep. Jasmine Crockett. Every seat was filled. One mother brought a folder full of her son's overdue tickets. A man asked about a landlord dispute. A teenager wanted to know how to meet with their school board. Jasmine answered every question, as she always did, clearly, calmly, and without pretense. No one mentioned Piers Morgan. She didn't either. Because Jasmine knew the real impact wasn't measured in TV clips. It showed up the next day, in the everyday struggles people still had to face. Later that week, Jasmine posted a short video on social media. No fancy production, just her sitting in her office. "I want to thank everyone who reached out. The support has meant a lot," she said. "But I hope what stood out wasn't just what I said, it was why I said it. I didn't go on that show to go viral. I went to speak on behalf of people who don't usually get invited to those kinds of tables. And I'll keep showing up for them, whether the cameras are on or not." That message resonated even more than the live interview. It reminded people that what they'd witnessed wasn't a one-off. It was the result of years of listening, learning, and holding ground, even when the room made it hard. A teacher in Bakersfield used the clip in her civics class. A nonprofit in Tallahassee asked to include it in their organizer training. A high schooler in Flagstaff messaged Jasmine's office and wrote, "You helped me speak up to my teacher today when she said racism doesn't exist anymore. I didn't yell, I just said what I knew." That was the real outcome. It wasn't about shutting someone down on air, it was about giving others the confidence to speak with purpose, clarity, and without apology. And yet, powerful as all that was, Jasmine's final message, the one no one expected, brought the entire moment full circle. 2 weeks later, Jasmine Crockett stood behind a podium in a modest auditorium on El Paso's South Side. There were no TV crews, no national press, just folding chairs and everyday people. Mothers with strollers, veterans in ball caps, teens with notebooks, and elders dressed for Sunday. The event, organized by local volunteers, was simple. Bottled water on the table. A relative managing sound from a dusty laptop. Jasmine wasn't there to deliver a speech. She came to listen. For more than an hour, community members stood and shared their experiences. Stories of denied housing applications. A nephew wrongly stopped by police, working 2 jobs and still falling behind. None of it was new, but all of it mattered. Then someone finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air. How do we keep going when it feels like no one's really listening? Jasmine stepped up to the mic. She looked tired but not defeated. The kind of tired that comes from showing up and doing the work, not pretending to. She paused, scanned the crowd, then said plainly, "They don't listen until you make them." The room went quiet. You won't always have a mic. You won't always have a camera. But that doesn't make your story any less worth sharing, she said. I was fortunate to have that moment on television. I didn't win anything. I just reminded people that speaking honestly doesn't require being soft. A low hum of agreement moved through the seats. We're constantly told to shrink ourselves just to be heard. We're asked to be quieter, gentler, more polite. But no one ever asks that of those who ignore our struggles. Isn't that something? She leaned in a bit. But here's what that day taught me. Something I want each of you to remember. You don't have to raise your voice to raise the standard. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. A man at the back, arms crossed, nodded thoughtfully. We're told to wait our turn, to find the right words, to wait until others are ready to hear us. But if we keep waiting for perfect timing, we'll wait forever. She let the words settle. There was no rush. "I didn't speak on that show to throw shade," Jasmine said. "I spoke because I was done asking to be taken seriously." And that was it. That was the message. It wasn't about going viral or trending. It was about what happens when someone tells the truth in a space where it's not convenient, and does so in a way that makes people question why they're uncomfortable. Courage, she continued, isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's the quietest line in the room that moves everything forward. The applause that followed was brief, not booming, but sincere. The kind that stays with people long after the lights go off, and the chairs are packed away. After the event, a teenager approached her in the hallway. Nervous, holding his phone tightly. "Do you remember the clip that went viral?" he asked. Jasmine smiled. "I do." He nodded slowly. "I didn't think people like you existed." She looked him in the eye. "People like you exist," she said. "I just happened to have the mic that day." And that was the real takeaway. The impact wasn't tied to one moment, one quote, or one headline. It was in how those words moved from a stage in Burbank to a living room in Cincinnati, a school cafeteria in Albuquerque, a park bench in Milwaukee. Those words weren't hers anymore. They belonged to everyone who had ever felt too bold, too emotional, too direct, just for speaking truthfully. As Jasmine left the auditorium, she didn't carry the applause with her. She left it behind for those who needed it more. And as she walked to her car, the only sound was the steady pace of her footsteps, quiet, steady, unmistakably sure. Because lasting change doesn't always arrive in noise. Sometimes, it comes in the silence that follows a truth fully heard. If this story resonated with you, think about where your voice matters, whether people are paying attention or not. And if that matters to you, go ahead and subscribe. We'll keep sharing stories that don't wait for permission.